This video is about some of the things that happened in the 2014 Scottish independence referendum. I know that was 11 years ago from today, but it keeps propping up in online media. People talk about it, mention it, as if it was some fantastic thing, which it was. The happiness I saw among many people in Scotland in the streets with their satires was truly a great thing to remember. But it was rigged. It was against us. After the October the 2012, when the First Minister and Prime Minister signed an agreement called the Edinburgh Agreement, even built within it from the very beginning was the fact that this was a rigged election. The UK No campaign that fought the Yes groups broke the electoral rules and also the rules of the Edinburgh Agreement. I'll mention these briefly as we go through. The vote, for many of us will know this, was the 18th of September 2014, roughly 2 years after the Edinburgh Agreement. The Edinburgh Agreement did not specify anywhere in it that the UK would have to abide by the results of the referendum. The Edinburgh Agreement specified a purdah period prior to the vote where no new policies would or could be raised. The purdah period was 60 days. But the biggest weakness of the whole agreement was that the UK state chose a franchise that was the same as a council election. In council elections, everyone in the area can have a vote, no matter where they originated from geographically. They made a big thing about it all the way through the beginning and called it a civic election. In many of the Yes Group blogs, they talked about a civic election if it was a fantastic thing, but it was a con. When you change a country's constitution, you do not use a council election franchise. There's reasons for that. The difference between the civic vote, as defined in the 2014 referendum, and the constitutional vote is this. In the civic vote, it was decided to give people 16 and over a vote. Everyone. It didn't matter where you came from, anywhere in the world. If you lived in Scotland and you'd been here long enough, say 4 months, you could register to vote. A constitutional vote is different. Only those that have a stake in the country and understand the country and have knowledge of the country get a vote. This is because if you come into a country as an immigrant, you actually have your heart and your soul and your memory and your history from the country you come from. It's only your children or your children's children that truly buy into the new country. You can see that in tales of immigrants over the years that have come in. So a constitutional vote is open to everyone, in this case aged 16 and over. But only people, as I've just said, who have a stake. The UN's been working on giving sovereignty back to people since 1949 when they were founded, and as time's gone on, they've perfected the rules to make it fair and balanced to the people from the country that is having a vote. So the UN rules would state that native-born Scots living in Scotland would have a vote. People born out with Scotland from Scots parents that live in the country now would have a vote. Only others that have a stake in the country would have a vote. Before I move on to explain this further, I'll give you 2 examples of what I mean by a stake. And these are real people that I personally know. There's 2 people I know who live in Fife. The male in the relationship came to this country from England aged 3 to work near Glenrothes in Fife. His father was a miner. His wife was born in Germany and came here as a 2-year-old to get away from the chaos in 1947. They married when they met. He worked in manufacturing and later in IT, and she spent all her life as a teacher. They had 2 children and contributed to Scotland. In effect, from childhood they were Scots. They should have a vote. Another couple I know who live in Pitlochry in Perthshire. They came here 25 years ago. They wanted away from the rat race in Essex, and they'd had a couple of trips to Scotland prior to that on holiday and liked it. And they bought a house in Pitlochry much larger than they could afford in Essex, and they contributed nothing to Scotland. They had lived their life. The man was self-employed jeweller, and that was it. His views were extremely strong unionist. He didn't recognise that Scotland or Wales existed. It was part of Britain. Now he's entitled to those views, and had he had a true stake in the country, he should have got a vote. But he didn't. He didn't contribute anything at all to the country that he lived in, so he shouldn't get a vote. That's what I mean by a stakeholder, and that's what the UN means, and it's defined accurately. In the 2014 vote, 9% of the people in Scotland were born out with the UK. 260,000 of those came from the mid-1990s onwards to actually get economic living. They were economic migrants. They were doing that while their own country was rebuilding after the poor administration and control at the close of the USSR. They shouldn't have a vote. But the people, the other half, came here after the Second World War. In the chaos there, they had jobs here, children, grew the economy, and became in effect Scots. So half those 523,000 get a vote, the other half don't. There was 389,000 people at the time from the rest of the UK living in Scotland. Most are immigrants here for financial reasons. Perhaps came here because it was free education for their children at university and other rules, a better living standard, more space, less congestion and so on. The majority of those people, not all, but the majority, should not get a vote. It's only those in a constitutional vote that have done something and bought into the country. That's the meaning. For example, 2 years later, there was a Brexit referendum. In that referendum, the UK used a constitutional vote because it was a constitutional vote, and non-UK residents, no matter where they came from or how long they've worked here or lived here, had a vote. That same franchise should have been used in Scotland, as I've just explained. Then it would have been fair, then it would have been constitutional. And the Purdah period. Purdah is one of the very few words that came from the British Empire in India and came into the English language. It's basically an area where you shut up and keep quiet. In the Edinburgh Agreement, it was 60 days, the Purdah period, but Better Together broke it several times, spectacularly when they talked about the vow. In the last week and a half of the referendum, the UK government panicked. They actually thought that the yes was going to win. And UP polls at the time, opinion polls, said that yes was going to come in at 52 to 55% yes. But the vow came in, and it swung it. And it swung it because it managed to get to the people that wanted yes, but were still a bit dubious. And the vow promised lots of things. This was 2 days before the election, in the 60-day purdah period. It promised maximum devolution. Indeed, Gordon Brown, an ex-Prime Minister, ex-Labour Prime Minister, talked 2 days before and the day before as if we were going to get a federal state. He said in the vow that the Scottish Parliament would be made permanent. And they said that a Smith Commission would come and it would actually allow us to move to get more powers for Scotland. We never got the maximum devolution. The Scottish Parliament was never made permanent, and the Smith Commission actually gave us 2 extra law improvements in 2016 and did actually nothing. Every single thing in the vow was not given. They swung a vote very cleverly, I must say, by lying grossly to the Scottish public. Not only did they lie about that, but as an aside, Wings Over Scotland, which is a Yes group, published a book soon after the election, and it detailed over 1,200 promises that were given by the No campaign. Not one, even today, 11 years later, not one has been met. The whole thing was a con. And what about the media during the campaign? The Edinburgh Agreement envisaged a 50-50 split, where the media would give a balance to and for independence. In fact, in 2012, the Scotsman newspaper based in Edinburgh did that. It started off by being given both sides' views, because I read it at that time. I stopped reading it when they went pro-no and stopped being balanced. There was a campaigner and Professor John Robertson who worked at Glasgow University, and he analysed the media. And he showed that 70% of the media, all of the mainstream media, no exceptions, all of the mainstream media, video, TV, newspapers were against it. It was only really the internet that had the pro element. If you search under John Robertson media bias in Scottish referendum on YouTube, you'll find his video of the facts. There was also lots of voter tampering reported after in lots of different newspapers and things. There's examples of it shown here. There was 10 cases in Glasgow that were actually said that things were abused, and lots of people in different groups reported this to the Electoral Commission, who did nothing. That's all the main facts of the things that went wrong. I was trying to think, how do I summarise this? And while I was looking at reasons about voter tampering, I found a paper. So I'm going to take some of that paper and simply read it to you, which is longer than I wanted to do, but it gives the message very clearly. And at the end of that, you'll see the name of the person that actually wrote this article. This is just part of it. Procedural irregularities and the illusion of transparency, while overt interference and structural bias shaped the political environment of the 2014 referendum. Procedural anomalies on the day of the vote and during the count introduced further doubts regarding the integrity of the process. A significant body of testimony from eyewitnesses, polling agents, and observers has raised legitimate concerns about the transparency and verifiability of the referendum's conduct. A major source of unease concerns the handling of postal votes, which constituted a significant proportion of the total ballot. Postal voting, by its very nature, removes the act of voting from public oversight and renders the chain of custody vulnerable to manipulation. In the case of the 2014 referendum, numerous voters reported never receiving their ballots, while others expressed unease at how the ballots were collected, transported and stored. In some areas, the number of postal votes recorded exceeded the number of voters available in that complete area, even if you allowed redundancy factored in for death and so on. Despite these concerns, there was no independent audit of the postal voting process. The absence of such an audit in a vote of this magnitude represents a grave failure of democratic safeguards. Concerns were also raised about ballot counting procedures. Multiple witnesses from different counting centres across Scotland reported practices that deviated from standard electoral protocols, were summarily dismissed despite narrow margins and irregularities being reported. The absence of any exit polls and the rapid pace of which the final results were declared further compounded suspicion, especially given the complexity and national significance of the referendum. Equally disturbing were inconsistencies in campaign finance. The pro-union Better Together campaign received a series of last-minute donations from major donors, including individuals closely tied to the Anglo-British English establishment. These funds allowed for a final barrage of media advertising and targeted outreach in the final days before the vote. By contrast, the Yes campaign operated under tighter financial constraints without equivalent institutional backing. Moreover, government departments, including the HM Treasury, issued official-looking documents outlining supposed economic dangers of independence, a move widely criticised as an abuse of state resources for partisan purposes. Transparency also failed in the realm of oversight. Despite the referendum's importance, international election observers were either not invited or given only minimal access. This stands in contrast to the practice adopted in many post-conflict or transitional democracies where international monitoring is considered essential. The lack of such oversight creates an accountability vacuum. It allows the Anglo-British English government to operate within a self-referential framework, judging its own conduct without external verification. For Scotland to hold a credible future referendum, it is essential that the procedural architecture be subject to international supervision. The 2014 process, while outwardly polished, was democratically deficient. To allow it to serve as a precedent would be to normalise democratic decay. These 3 pages explain exactly what I said before that, about breaking the rules, about having the wrong franchise, having no audit, not looking at problems that people reported all the way through, specifically in the west coast of Scotland. That is the person that wrote this article. You can find him on the internet if you want to know more. Finally, at the very last section of that person's paper, he wrote something about Scottish sovereignty, which is what you get if you're independent. He said, no vote secured by promises that are later revoked can retain moral or democratic authority. That fact alone invalidates the political legitimacy of the 2014 result. Think about it, in the last 2 or 3 days, the vow and the huge onslaught of media pushed and pushed for a federal Scotland. It swayed enough people to actually swing their vote. The promised extra powers for the Scottish Parliament and for the Scottish people in power, political power within the Union, never happened. None of it. It was all a lie to swing a vote. They were panicking. And then he said, we are no longer in the realm of abstract constitutional theory. The Scottish people are living the consequences of the deception. They now exist within a political framework that denies their democratic will, extracts their natural resources, and subjects them to foreign policy decisions they have overwhelmingly rejected. This is not self-government, it is subordination maintained by legal inertia political manipulation and strategic misrepresentation. This is not a matter of international domestic political disagreements, nor is it a question of separatism. Scotland is not a province seeking rupture from a national core. It is an ancient nation with its own legal system, historical institutions and cultural identity that long predates the Anglo-British English state. Scotland's right to reclaim its sovereignty is not a technicality to be settled within the boundaries of Westminster politics, but a matter of international justice, legal principle, and democratic integrity. The issue at stake is not rebellion, but the restoration of a vital sovereignty. That's the end of my talk. I hope you found it a little bit enlightening and made you think about what actually happened. It was rigged. It was a con. Before you go, here are the other videos that I've actually created in my time doing these since the year 2020. If you go to my channel at Robert Anderson 9116, you can get a list of them all, or you can key in the YouTube search bar the name of the video listed here. This is my list of things to do. I thought I'd do a history one next about a man called Daniel Defoe. He wrote the book Robinson Crusoe. He was a traitor and a spy working for England in Scotland. And then I'm going to do a short video on monarchy, a future question. Thank you for listening to this video. I appreciate your time.